I never expected that hiring a contractor for my kitchen renovation would lead to one of the most unusual afternoons of my life. There I was, standing in my half-demolished kitchen on a sweltering July day, when Dave, the contractor I'd hired based on a friend's recommendation, decided that the 95-degree heat was simply too much for conventional work attire. "Hope you don't mind," he said casually, peeling off his already sweat-soaked t-shirt and hanging it on a nearby cabinet handle. "Heat like this, you gotta adapt or die." Before I could formulate any kind of response, there he was, all 6'2" of him, sporting nothing but work boots, cargo shorts, and a surprisingly elaborate tattoo of what appeared to be a dragon battling a samurai across his left shoulder blade. Now, I should mention that I work from home as a technical writer, which means my daily interactions typically involve video calls where everyone is not only fully clothed but often overly formal. So to suddenly find myself sharing my kitchen space with a shirtless stranger wielding a sledgehammer was, to put it mildly, outside my comfort zone. Dave, however, seemed entirely unperturbed by the situation, chatting away about load-bearing walls and electrical codes as if this were the most normal contractor-client interaction in the world. What happened over the next few hours would challenge my preconceptions about professional boundaries, physical labor, and the unexpected ways we connect with others through shared experiences. Because this story isn't just about a contractor who worked shirtless, it's about what happened when he asked me to hold the ladder, and how that simple request led to a surprisingly profound afternoon that made me reconsider my understanding of work, vulnerability, and human connection. Let me take you back to how this all began. 3 weeks earlier, a persistent leak had finally forced me to address my kitchen's aging infrastructure. After getting quotes from several contractors, I settled on Dave's company, Built to Last Construction, partly because of his reasonable pricing, but mostly because of the enthusiasm he showed during the initial consultation. He had spoken about my modest kitchen renovation as if it were the Sistine Chapel, full of potential and worthy of his absolute best work. That passion had won me over immediately. The project was scheduled to take 2 weeks, and for the first few days, everything had proceeded normally. Dave and his assistant, Miguel, arrived promptly each morning, coffee in hand, and worked steadily through the day. They were professional, courteous, and always cleaned up before leaving. But on day 4, Miguel called in sick with a summer flu that was making the rounds, leaving Dave to handle the day's work alone. "No problem," he assured me. "Today we're just removing the old cabinets and prepping for the electrical work. I can handle it solo." The morning progressed without incident, but as the temperature climbed toward midday, the kitchen, with its western exposure and lack of functional ventilation, part of what we were fixing, became something close to an oven. My house is an older Victorian with high ceilings, but poor air circulation. The kitchen renovation had included removing the ancient window air conditioning unit, which meant the only cooling came from a portable fan that seemed to be merely pushing the hot air around rather than providing any relief. I was working in my office on the other side of the house, occasionally hearing the sounds of demolition, the crack of wood being pried from walls, the clatter of debris being swept up, and Dave's occasional muttered commentary on the previous owner's questionable DIY attempts. Around 1 o'clock, I decided to check on progress and offer Dave some of the iced tea I'd made. That's when I found him standing in the middle of my kitchen, shirtless, examining the ceiling with a look of concern. Now, I should clarify something here. Dave wasn't what you'd call conventionally attractive in a Hollywood sense. He was probably in his late 40s, with the sturdy build of someone who'd spent decades in physical labor. His skin was weathered from years of outdoor work, and besides the dragon samurai tattoo, he had what looked like an old Marine Corps emblem on his right bicep. His body told the story of his life. A scar here, a slightly crooked finger there, the visible results of a career built on physical exertion and occasional mishaps. "Oh, hey," he said, noticing me hovering uncertainly in the doorway with 2 glasses of iced tea. "Perfect timing. I was just about to come find you." He accepted the drink gratefully, downing half of it in one go. "Thanks, I needed that. Listen, I think I found your leak problem." He pointed toward a dark stain on one of the exposed ceiling joists. "See that? That's not from the sink plumbing like we thought. That's coming from upstairs, probably the bathroom. Mind if I take a look?" I nodded, still slightly distracted by the unexpected shirtlessness of it all, and followed him upstairs to the bathroom that sat directly above the kitchen. Dave examined the floor around the toilet, pressing on different spots and nodding to himself. Yep, just as I thought. You've got a slow leak around the wax ring. Water's seeping down and following the pipe chase into the kitchen ceiling. Easy fix, but we should take care of it before we put in your new ceiling. I've got the parts in my truck. We headed back downstairs, and Dave stopped in the kitchen again, this time looking up at a recessed light fixture. Actually, while I'm at it, I should check that electrical box too. Previous owner did some creative wiring that's definitely not up to code. He glanced around, then pointed to an aluminum extension ladder leaning against the wall. Mind giving me a hand with that? I just need you to hold it steady while I take a quick look. And that's how I found myself holding a ladder for a shirtless man in my kitchen on a Tuesday afternoon. As Dave climbed up, I couldn't help but notice the constellation of small scars and bruises that mapped his back, the physical record of a lifetime in construction. There was something oddly vulnerable about it, this stranger trusting me to keep him safe as he balanced 8 feet off the ground. So how'd you get into technical writing? Dave called down as he removed the light fixture cover and began examining the wiring with a small pen light. The question caught me off guard. In our previous interactions, our conversations had been entirely focused on the renovation, materials, timelines, costs. This sudden interest in my professional life created an unexpected bridge between us. I started as an engineer, actually, I replied, adjusting my grip on the ladder. But I found out I was better at explaining how things worked than designing them. Been doing it for about 12 years now. Dave nodded, his attention still on the wiring above. That's the thing about finding your niche, right? I was supposed to be an accountant. That's what my parents wanted. Did 2 years of college before I realized I was miserable sitting at a desk all day. He reached into his tool belt and pulled out a voltage tester. Started helping my uncle on job sites during summer breaks to make extra money, and it just clicked. 27 years later, here I am, half naked in your kitchen. He laughed at that, a deep, genuine sound that somehow made the whole situation seem less awkward. Whoa, look at this, he said suddenly. Previous owner was definitely not an electrician. See this? He gestured for me to look up, which was challenging while still holding the ladder steady. I caught a glimpse of what appeared to be a tangled mess of wires. They spliced into this junction box to add those under-cabinet lights, but they didn't use the right gauge wire. It's a fire waiting to happen. Good thing we caught it. As Dave continued his inspection, he shared stories from his decades in construction, the strangest things he'd found inside walls, including a perfectly preserved newspaper from 1964 and once, bizarrely, a mummified squirrel, the most challenging projects he'd tackled, and the satisfaction of transforming spaces for people. There was a poetry to how he spoke about his work, a genuine pride that transcended the physical labor involved. You know what's funny? He said as he carefully disconnected the dangerous wiring. People always assume this kind of work is just about muscle, but it's really about problem solving. Every house is like a puzzle with missing pieces, and my job is to figure out what goes where, what can be saved, and what needs to be completely rebuilt. I found myself sharing too, talking about the challenges of translating complex technical concepts into language anyone could understand, the satisfaction of clarity, the frustration of working with engineers who couldn't explain their own creations. There was something about the unusual dynamic. Me looking up at him looking down at me, both of us focused on our temporary shared goal, that made conversation flow more easily than it might have across a desk or table. The ladder wobbled slightly as Dave shifted position, and I instinctively tightened my grip. You're doing great, he said, noticing my concern. Most people get nervous about ladder duty. My wife refuses to do it anymore after I fell and broke my wrist 10 years ago. You fell? I asked, suddenly very aware of the responsibility literally in my hands. Yeah, but that was different. Working alone, rush job, didn't secure it properly. Rookie mistake, and I'd been in the business 15 years by then. He started making his way down the ladder. That's the thing about this work. The minute you get cocky, that's when you get hurt. Respect the process, respect the tools, respect gravity. His feet touched the floor, and I felt a disproportionate sense of relief. Thanks for the spot, he said, wiping his brow with the back of his hand. The kitchen seemed even hotter now, and I noticed beads of sweat tracing paths down his chest and back. Without the barrier of professional attire, there was an undeniable humanity to our interaction. Just two people dealing with heat, gravity, and home repair. So what's the verdict? I asked, nodding toward the ceiling. Well, you've got two issues. The toilet leak is straightforward. I can fix that today. The electrical needs more work. That junction box is supporting too many circuits, and the wiring is a hazard. I'd recommend we bring in my electrician to rewire this section properly before we close up the walls. Dave reached for his phone to show me pictures he'd taken of the problematic wiring. As he swiped through the images, I noticed his background photo, Dave in a tuxedo standing beside a young woman in a wedding dress. My daughter's wedding last year, he explained, catching my glance. Proudest day of my life. She's an environmental engineer, way smarter than her old man. The pride in his voice was unmistakable, and I saw him in yet another light. Not just as the shirtless contractor in my kitchen, but as a father who had worked with his hands to give his daughter opportunities he hadn't had. The conversation shifted to family, to the passing of generations, to the different ways we measure success and fulfillment. Dave talked about how physical labor had given him a relationship with the world that felt increasingly rare in the digital age. There's something about creating something tangible, you know? At the end of the day, I can point to a wall or a roof or a kitchen and say, I built that. It'll still be standing long after I'm gone. As the afternoon progressed, Dave fixed the toilet leak as promised and made temporary adjustments to the electrical system until his specialist could come. I found myself helping more actively, holding tools, passing supplies, even assisting with the toilet repair under his patient guidance. The initial awkwardness of his shirtlessness had faded entirely, replaced by a comfortable working rhythm and ongoing conversation that ranged from home maintenance tips to favorite books. Surprisingly, we shared a love of historical fiction to the best local restaurants. When Miguel called to say he'd be back tomorrow, Dave seemed almost disappointed. We made good progress today, he said, finally putting his shirt back on as he prepared to leave. The simple act of dressing seemed to shift us back toward our original contractor-client dynamic, but something had undeniably changed. We had spent the afternoon in a strange, liminal space, not quite friends, but no longer merely professional acquaintances. As I reflect on that day now, with my kitchen renovation long completed, I'm struck by how much that afternoon taught me about the artificial boundaries we create. There's something profoundly honest about physical labor that strips away pretense. Dave's shirtless work wasn't an act of impropriety, but one of necessity and practicality. My holding the ladder wasn't just assistance, but an act of trust on both our parts. In those hours, we existed in a space where the usual social scripts were temporarily suspended, allowing for a more authentic connection. The experience made me reconsider my relationship with my own body and its capabilities. As someone who works primarily with my mind, I rarely engage with the physical world in the way Dave does every day. Holding that ladder, feeling the weight and responsibility of it, reconnected me to a more fundamental kind of work that our increasingly digital society often overlooks or devalues. It also reminded me that vulnerability, whether it's the physical vulnerability of working shirtless or the emotional vulnerability of sharing stories about our lives, is often the foundation for meaningful human connection. Dave trusted me with his safety on that ladder. I trusted him with my home. In that exchange of trust, we discovered the common ground that exists beneath our different professions, backgrounds, and daily experiences. When the renovation was finally completed 2 weeks later, the kitchen looked transformed. New cabinets, countertops, lighting, and appliances had turned the outdated space into something both beautiful and functional. On the final day, Dave and Miguel spent extra time walking me through everything they'd done, explaining how to maintain different elements and what to watch for in the coming years. As they packed up their tools, Dave handed me a small wooden box. Made this from some of the old cabinet wood, he explained. Seemed ashamed to waste it. The box was simple but beautifully crafted, with dovetail joints and a smooth finish. Inside was a handwritten note with his cell phone number. For any future projects or emergencies, it read. Or if you ever want to learn more about home repair, you've got good instincts. That box sits on my desk now, holding paper clips and thumbtacks, a daily reminder of an unexpected afternoon and the connections that can form when we step outside our comfort zones. Sometimes I think about what would have happened if I'd reacted differently to Dave's shirtless work. If I'd been uncomfortable or asked him to put his shirt back on, I would have missed the conversation, the stories, the glimpse into a life and profession so different from my own. In our increasingly divided world, there's something valuable about these moments of unexpected connection. The discovery that beneath our different exteriors, work clothes, and professional identities, we share common hopes, struggles, and satisfactions. Sometimes it takes a shirtless contractor and a wobbly ladder to remind us of that simple truth. And yes, I did call Dave again, not just for home repairs but to learn. Over the past year, he's taught me basic plumbing, how to properly use a drill, and most recently, how to build a simple bookshelf. I'm still not particularly skilled, but there's a satisfaction in creating something tangible with my hands that complements the abstract work I do with my mind. Dave remains professionally shirtless on particularly hot days, and I've graduated from ladder holder to somewhat competent assistant. Some of the most interesting conversations of my life have happened while holding a level or sanding wood, proving that wisdom and connection can be found in the most unexpected places, even at the top of a ladder, with a shirtless contractor showing you what's really going on behind your walls. Total _count, 13,682.